Big questions about big data and ethics, implications of dependence and care. Attempting to answer questions about ethics and big data can quickly lead to vertigo. Also, in my experience, the more I read on the topic, the more disoriented, confused, and frustrated I feel. In an attempt to make sense of this unmoored sensation, and in order to try and get some useful long-term bearings, I'm going to start off by engaging in some unabashedly broad meta-reflection about some big questions. Then, after taking a stab at these larger questions, I'll consider the implications for thinking about ethics and big data. Part 1. Why are questions of ethics and big data so disorienting? I want to first reflect a bit on the specific causes of this disorientation that arises when reflecting on questions of ethics and big data. There are three causes that seem especially salient. 1. The erosion of technological limits. Technological progress is developing at mind-bending speeds, and the future prospects of artificial intelligence seem nearly limitless. The capacity of algorithms and robots to replicate and improve upon actions were, in previous centuries and decades, thought to belong only to the purview of humans. This phenomenon thrusts upon mankind a radically new kind of identity crisis. What does it mean to be human? 2. Pluralistic human values from the perspective of machines. We live in a pluralistic world where there is little agreement about foundational human values. Disagreements abound. However, as machines achieve increasing intelligence and approach the level of consciousness, human versus human differences in value are swamped by differences in value between humans and machines, differences that are an order of magnitude greater. 3. Contemplating humans versus animals versus machines. Contemplating humanity's superiority over other animals is a very old topic in Western thought. Aristotle, for example, wrote about the essence of animals and the essence of human beings in comparison to animals. Building on this work, modern thinkers then emphasized human rationality even more, starting with Descartes' famous dictum, "I think, therefore I am," and Kant extending this rationality to the realm of ethics with his universal account of practical rationality. It is true that the 20th century gave rise to deep criticisms of these modernist pretensions. However, only as we've begun to glimpse the realities and magnitudes of the superiority of machine intelligence relative to humans can we fully appreciate the depth of our animal natures and limitations. Part 2. What is it to be human? If being human is not first and foremost a matter of rationality or calculation, then what is our essence as human beings? To help answer this big question, I will briefly invoke the help of 4 diverse thinkers. I want to start with a reference deeply embedded in pop culture that directly explores the question of machine intelligence and the essence of being human. I mean Spike Jonze's movie Her, starring Joaquin Phoenix as a lonely man who develops an intimate relationship with an intelligent robot played by Scarlett Johansson. I believe it's not too controversial to assert that Jones's answer to what it is to be human has something to do with the deeply embedded human desire to be in caring relationships of mutual dependence. Moving up the ladder of artistic references, I next call on Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky's writing probes the depths of the human heart and mind in ways that, in my not-so-humble opinion, go deeper than any other single author. The underground man's desire to smash the Crystal Palace can be understood as an early expression of the existential crisis that technology inflicts on humanity. It might be tempting to interpret Dostoevsky as pointing to human freedom or self-determination as the essence of being human. But I think that would be a mistake. After all, in the second half of the story, the character of Liza brings to light the underground man's deep-seated alienation. The second half of Dostoevsky's career also explores themes of mutual dependence and care, with, for example, the contrast in The Brothers Karamazov between the characters of Father Zosima and Alyosha standing in stark contrast to Ivan's alienated suffering. Next, in the French phenomenological tradition, another interesting reference point here is Jean-Luc Marion's book, The Erotic Phenomenon, where he, in effect, radically rewrites Descartes' meditations by replacing the thinking subject, cogito ergo sum, with a loving subject, amo ergo sum. For my final reference, I call on Alasdair MacIntyre, the famous author of the book After Virtue, which helped ignite the virtue ethics movement, now standing as a respectable rival to consequentialist and deontological modes of ethical inquiry. MacIntyre is especially useful because he's been quite influential in business ethics literature. However, this influence is somewhat ironic because After Virtue is mercilessly critical of the management profession. Also, because of this critical stance, there is significant disagreement among scholars whether MacIntyre can be productively ported into business ethics discussions, or whether doing so ultimately distorts key tenets of its philosophy. But I'm going to sidestep this controversy, and I'll do so by referring to MacIntyre's later work, specifically in the book Dependent Rational Animals. It is in this work that MacIntyre most directly addresses questions regarding the essence of being human. Rather than starting with rationality, MacIntyre starts this book with a series of careful observations about the commonalities between humans and other animals. From this beginning point, MacIntyre goes on to follow Aristotle in exploring the various ways that human beings are social animals. MacIntyre then goes beyond Aristotle and considers, with a nod to feminist scholars, the importance of dependence and care in human relationships. MacIntyre focuses especially on bonds of human relationship forged through interactions in family and community contexts involving stark forms of vulnerability and mutually acknowledged dependence. MacIntyre does go on to emphasize the importance of rationality and its central role in human experience and society. However, he emphasizes the ways that rationality is embedded within social relationships of mutual dependence and care, which characterize the human condition. So, part 3. What are the implications? If we accept this dependence and care view as correctly capturing the essence of what it means to be human, then what are the implications for tackling the challenges of ethics in big data? I will consider 4 implications. First, let's consider how big data threatens to weaken the borders protecting our private lives. One response to this threat on our privacy would be to combat it directly by clarifying the ethical wrongs that such encroachments to privacy entail, or by striving to find technological solutions to these threats. Although these approaches should be encouraged, a dependence and care approach suggests another response, namely to foster the development of networks of care. Shame culture is one manifestation of the way that technology is encroaching upon our private lives, because our private opinions have increasingly public significance. In these situations, a more cognitive/rational conception of ethics focuses on the merits of a particular viewpoint about which an opinion might be expressed. A dependence and care perspective, however, focuses attention on the communal harms that a shame culture can engender. In addition to better revealing the problems associated with shame culture, a dependence and care perspective is also more conducive for construing solutions to these kinds of problems. Insofar as the problems arise from a community that is more inclined to enforce the opinions of the crowd, an antidote must be found by either improving these community relations so that care is more deeply embedded, or alternative communities of support and care must be formed in order to support the shamed individuals. Now, I'm not arguing that changing shameful opinions cannot be encouraged. Rather, I am arguing that the means by which such encouragement can be made must itself be the subject of ethical scrutiny. Second, as decision-making becomes increasingly outsourced to algorithmic analysis of bigger and bigger data sets, problems of compartmentalization will become increasingly prominent. I'm using the term compartmentalization here in reference to a particular critique of modernity that MacIntyre develops, in which he argues that the specialized nature of modern social roles undermines notions of collective responsibility. MacIntyre explores this idea by considering the moral culpability of a train conductor who does not question the cargo that is in what the cargo is in a train that he's supervising. And it turns out this cargo includes Holocaust prisoners. A form of this same problem arises in my own discipline of finance, when investment portfolio managers are effectively encouraged to turn a blind eye to morally questionable practices of businesses in the portfolio. This blind eye encouragement stems from the arm's length nature of the financial relationship, which effectively outsources the task of ethical monitoring. This problem of compartmentalization is not only difficult to identify, but it's also difficult to combat. Codified rules and juridical regulations, for example, tend to be ineffective. In our increasingly dynamic world, this failure becomes more acute as formal regulations struggle to keep up with quickly adapting problems. A more promising form of redress is to focus on fostering what MacIntyre calls networks of giving and receiving. That is, communities of mutually acknowledged dependence where genuine care for others is deeply embedded. If such networks are formed on the basis of an intentional recognition of group agency and cultivation of collective responsibility, then compartmentalized abdications of responsibility will not have to be policed by formal policies. Rather, the network will naturally recognize and respond to failures of care as they arise. I leave the question of how to form such networks for another time. Third, with the rise of capitalism and urbanization, the profitability of repeated interactions with the same individual have dramatically decreased. Social media, however, is starting to reverse certain aspects of this trend in at least two ways. First, it is much easier now with big data to identify proximate network connections that can be used in lieu of the town gossip in older times in order to tap the power of reputational mechanisms for reducing information asymmetries. Because of this, certain ethical norms from the past, which govern social relationships in village contexts, will become relevant again. There are, of course, many implications and questions regarding this change, and each of them deserve careful consideration and analysis. A dependence and care perspective, however, is especially pregnant with possibilities for prescribing how self-regulating social norms ought to take shape, and how an upsurge in information can be directed in ways that encourage self-regulation of trust in networks. Many of these possibilities are, again, obscured from ethical perspectives focusing only on rationality. Fourth, and finally, because of network effects, big data has a tendency to push us towards centralized decision-making algorithms. This is not to say that the individual contributions of human perspectives on problems of a calculative nature won't continue to be relevant. However, it is reasonable to predict that human cognition will increase in significance relative to algorithmic procedures. From the perspective of ethical theories rooted in primarily cognitive conceptions of the human condition, these changes do not yet have any obvious moral valence. However, from the dependence and care perspective, these changes can be understood as undermining the goods associated with collective deliberation. After all, the goods associated with collective deliberation are not merely calculative in nature. Rather, the process of engaging in conversation with others within a network of care is conducive to human flourishing within the network. Thank you.